Hello and welcome back to the other special video in the film club series. This is part 2 of my top 20 films of all time. This is going to be my top 10 part of this list, and let's kick it off right away. So, number 10 on my list here is going to be Pulp Fiction. Now, Pulp Fiction, you know, obviously I'm going to have a Quentin Tarantino film on my list. He's one of my favorite directors of all time. I've seen all of his movies, with the exception of The Hateful Eight. And I actually plan on sitting down and watching that at some point and doing a film review of it on this channel. I just never got around to seeing it, but I've seen every other single one of his movies. And you know, Reservoir Dogs is also up there for me, but Pulp Fiction I think is his best work. Everything, like all the characters, all the actors in it. This was the movie that made Samuel L. Jackson a star, like a household name star. This is a movie that gave John Travolta a second big chance. You know, this was a big movie at the time. It was, you know, very recognized when it came out. It was a huge, massive success. You know, it won Tarantino the Oscar that year that it came out. It is a great, great movie. It's a great, very well written, and it's one of those movies where it doesn't take place in sequential order, and that's one reason why I really like it. So, now there are other Tarantino movies. He's made several. They're all really good in their own ways, but for my money, Pulp Fiction is the best one. So that's number 10 on my list. Number 9 on my list is going to be Ridley Scott's original Alien from 1979. This was a terrifying movie to me as a kid, and now you watch it and it's not as scary, but man, was it a scary movie as a kid. You have to remember, at the time this film was released, it was released between Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, and there were other science fiction films at the time, but nothing had done space on this scale for a horror genre. You know, obviously Star Wars isn't a horror movie, and the original designs of the xenomorph are just utterly terrifying. It's one of the scariest monster movies ever made, and you watch it today, obviously it doesn't hold up as well, but the special effects still hold up. It has this wonderful grainy, like 70s / early 80s science fiction feel to it that I really, really enjoy. Excellent movie, excellent soundtrack and score. The special effects are top notch. Excellent performances. Obviously this is a movie that put Sigourney Weaver on the map for her, and she does an excellent job as Ripley. You know, she reprised that role several times over, and while I'm a fan of this entire Alien franchise, including the new movies like Alien Covenant and Prometheus, my favorite one will always be the original Alien. And yes, the sequel, Aliens from 1985, also an excellent movie, but that movie is like Alien is the original, Aliens is like the action, kind of like Terminator to Terminator 2. It's the same thing for Alien and Aliens, but as I always gravitate more towards horror, for me, Alien is a much better movie. Number 8 on my list is going to be, I had to pick one of the Star Wars movies because obviously I could cheat and just say the entire trilogy, but in the interest of making this a complete list where I'm picking singular films and not letting this whole entire list get out of control, I'm picking The Empire Strikes Back. Now, I like the original Star Wars trilogy from beginning to end, but for everything that I like about those movies, I think Empire is the best one. I think it's a phenomenal movie, not only because of the story beats in it. You know, obviously there's the big reveal at the end of that movie that left people on a massive cliffhanger for 3 years, but there's also the special effects. The story is kind of more darker and serious than it was in Star Wars. It's the dark middle chapter, and I just really enjoy that movie. All the performances it brings back the characters you really liked from the original Star Wars, and it moves the story in a much more interesting direction. So out of all 3 of them, that's my personal favorite. Number 7 on my list then is going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. If I had to pick one Star Wars movie, I got to pick one Indiana Jones movie, and for me it's always going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think this, you know, in the 1980s, I believe this movie came out in 81, you have to remember, obviously Harrison Ford was a big star from Star Wars, and he was the perfect casting choice to play the character of Indiana Jones. This was a huge throwback to the 1940s and 1950s, you know, Saturday matinee action popcorn movies, and it's so well done. Obviously you have John Williams' excellent score. It's an excellent action movie in its own right. It's one of the best movies of all time, and it is almost perfect in that regard. It has an excellent quick-fire, rapid-paced script that keeps the film going at a perfect pace, and just everything about it is really well done. Some great cinematography too. Excellent movie. Number 6 on my list is going to be The Godfather, you know, Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece. Now, obviously, there are 3 Godfather movies, part 1, part 2, and part 3. First one's always going to be my favorite. If you ever want to see something crazy, you should click around on HBO. They did a cut where it is Godfather 1 and 2 mashed into one movie. It's a crazy way to watch that movie. For me, it's always going to be the original Godfather. I love that movie to death. I read the book when I was in high school. I actually took an advanced literature class, and it was kind of weird because we read The Godfather and then we spent like 2 weeks of that class watching this movie. And I think that was the first time I really saw The Godfather. Like, I had seen bits and pieces of it growing up as a kid. It's one of my dad's favorite movies of all times, and I love everything about it. It's such an interesting, fascinating story. It's a great gangster flick, and it really tells a great story. And you also have to remember, this is where it launched some very, very successful careers of prominent actors, obviously including Al Pacino. So, excellent movie. You should watch it. One of the best movies of all time. It's a movie that shouldn't be missed by anyone that loves film and has an appreciation for cinema. Well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here in my top 5 favorite films of all time. Number 5 on my list is going to be a more recent film within the last 10 years here, and that's going to be 2008's The Dark Knight. Now, this is one of 2 Batman films that are on my list. The other Batman films on my list edged it out just a little bit more because of a nostalgic sense, but I like Christopher Nolan's trilogy. I think through and through, from beginning to end, it's probably the best contained film Batman story we've received. I don't really care for the way he ended The Dark Knight Rises. I think I could write a better Batman story ending considering the realistic approach that Nolan took to this, but he was on fire when he made The Dark Knight, and late great Heath Ledger's final role in a movie. I mean, he also did that Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus movie, but this was his last big film role, and he just nailed it as the Joker in a way that we hadn't seen on film. And it was always the thing when they cast him, you know, there were a lot of those skeptical people on the internet, like, he can't do it, nobody can top Jack Nicholson. He topped Jack Nicholson, and his Joker was so crazy and eccentric and weird. But the thing that I appreciate about The Dark Knight is that there is no origin story to the Joker here. He just shows up and he just starts doing his thing. And that's kind of how it was in the comics too. There was no original origin to this character. He just showed up one day and started doing shit. And that's what I appreciate about it. Obviously, there are other great performances in this movie as well, but Heath Ledger is the person that really steals the show for this film. Obviously, if you're living under a rock and never seen The Dark Knight, you should go out and see it. It can stand alone on its own as a self-contained Batman film, but it also is the middle chapter into an entire trilogy, and that's what makes it the perfect Batman movie in terms of that. Number 5 for me on my list, The Dark Knight. Excellent film. Number 4 on my list is actually the movie that is on my t-shirt today, and that is Night of the Living Dead. Now, for me, growing up, I've always been a fan of the idea of zombies, but Night of the Living Dead is such a fascinating horror. It's a cinematic horror masterpiece. It was created on a shoestring budget. It's a piece of independent film history. It's one of those movies you watch where if for it and like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's just sort of timely that both George Romero and Tobe Hooper passed away this year. But you know, if it wasn't for these two men not only doing film like this independently and having their massive successes, you wouldn't have the independent film scene that you do today. You wouldn't have the independent YouTube is a thing that wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be standing here in front of a camera making this video right now if it wasn't for these men who pioneered the idea of independent film and independent video. They were pioneers in this, and Night of the Living Dead shows. One other thing that I really appreciate about Night of the Living Dead is it was a very ballsy move in the 1960s to take your predominantly white-centered story and make the lead actor an African-American man, and that's exactly what George Romero did. And this movie came out in 1967, well during the civil rights movements. So it was a very ballsy move that I think worked really well and spoke volumes to the race wars back then. So excellent movie. It lives up to the hype if you've ever read about it. It's just a great movie from front to end, and it really holds up even today. The special effects with the gore and stuff really well, and you have to think, like, this is kind of crazy when I think about it. I just realized this today. this year is the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead, so that's really crazy. I should sit down and watch it again. It's been a long time. I'm still hoping and crossing my fingers for a proper Blu-ray release for it, but Night of the Living Dead, favorite horror movie of all time. I love it to death. Number 3 on my list is probably gonna give me shit, and that's fine. I'm a huge fan of Michael Keaton. I think I've already well versed that on this channel, and obviously he's gonna be, you know, in my top 5. Now, he's done a lot of excellent movies, and maybe at some point I will do a film club video showcasing some of his best performances. However, he has 2 movies that are on this list. They're in my top 5, and the first one at number 3 is the other movie. Remember, if you watched the previous video, I told you there's 2 movies that I usually watch when I get sick and I'm stuck in bed. One of those movies is Tommy Boy, the other one is this movie, and this movie is Mr. Mom from 1983. Now, this is a crazy choice, and you would think, like, what are you talking about? Mr. Mom showcases Michael Keaton's excellent ability to be a comedic actor, and then obviously he also could do serious roles as well. This movie is just a perfect combination. It's written by John Hughes, and he is a father in the 80s who loses his job, and he essentially has to become the stay-at-home dad while his wife goes out and becomes the primary breadwinner. It's hilarious, it's fun, it has an excellent cast, and it always concerns me because every couple of years you hear like rumblings of they want to remake this movie. I just really hope that they don't. I think it's perfect the way it is. I think Michael Keaton is so good at it, good at his role, and he has a really good chemistry with actress Terry Garr, who is the mother in this movie. It's just a great movie all around. Excellent, hilarious, and a real heartwarming movie too. So number 3 on my list. I love this movie. Number 2 is where we're gonna get really nostalgic. I said there were 2 Batman movies on my list. This one edges out The Dark Knight for me just because it's the Batman movie I grew up with, starring the Batman that I grew up with, which is Michael Keaton, and that is the original 1989 Tim Burton Batman. Now, I've probably seen 1989 Batman over 100 times throughout my life. It is probably more than that, probably 200. I watched this movie so much as a kid, I wore out at least 2 VHS tapes of it. I originally, my uncle had recorded it for me off of like HBO or something, and I wore that tape out so much they had to go out and just buy the frickin' movie for me to watch. I love this movie, I adore this movie. It is where I first learned of the character of Batman. It's where I first fell in love with the character of Batman before I started getting into it with comics, toys, and video games and all of that. It was this movie that did it for me. You know, I was 3 years old. I saw a commercial trailer for this movie on TV, and it blew my mind, and I begged and begged and begged to see this film, and it lived up to my wildest fantasies about it. Michael Keaton, perfectly cast as Batman. Jack Nicholson, perfectly cast as the Joker. Now, you can argue that yes, they changed some of the Batman mythos in this movie. You know, obviously the character of Jack Napier isn't real, and they made him up for this movie to give the Joker an origin, and then they tried to tie it in by, instead of having Joe Chill be the person that killed Batman's parents, they let this Jack Napier character kill his parents. Yes, as a Batman fan, it bothers me a little bit, but you know what? I love this movie so much, I just don't really care. You also have Danny Elfman's fantastic Batman score. You have arguably my favorite Batmobile of all time, and if I ever had to choose a Batmobile to personally own and drive around, it would be the '89 Batmobile. It just is a damn sexy looking car, if we're being honest. So I love this movie to death. It's the movie that got me into Batman, got me into collecting the comics, the toys, the video games, all that stuff. I love this movie. Great movie. There's only one movie that I love just a bit more that edges it out. So here at number 1, my favorite movie of all time. I'm actually gonna pull it off my shelf. It might shock you. It might shock you what my choice is, but again, you have to remember, this is my list. It's my favorite movie of all time. I haven't seen it as many times as '89 Batman, but it is a movie I enjoy, and one of the reasons is it's a long movie. That is going to be the 1983 remake of the original 30s Scarface, starring Al Pacino. I adore this movie. I love his character. He's so over the top as Tony Montana. Obviously, I have a huge interest in drug cartels and that kind of stuff. I watch a lot of those kind of TV shows. You think of Sons of Anarchy, you think of Narcos, Law and Order, that kind of stuff. I've always enjoyed those things. So Scarface, for me, just a phenomenal movie. There's so many great quotable lines in Scarface. It's over the top with its violence. its language, everything about it. I love this movie. It's just a great action movie. It's a great gangster movie. Memorable performances. Everything about it. Love it to death. It edges out the '89 Batman just slightly as my favorite film of all time. Now I know people are gonna be like, you know, you didn't pick Citizen Kane. You didn't pick Gone with the Wind. You didn't pick Wizard of Oz. You didn't pick, and it's not to say that I dislike those movies or anything like that. For me, like, just this is my personal top 20 list. These are my favorite films of all time, and for me, favorite film of all time is Scarface. You know, this was a movie that when I bought my Xbox One when it launched, this was a Blu-ray that wouldn't work for some reason with that Blu-ray player. And eventually they updated that Blu-ray player and this worked, but when I went out and got a PS4, it worked on there, and then I would kid with my friends like, well, it's the superior system because it plays Scarface on Blu-ray. Awesome movie. That's my top 20 favorite films of all time. Hope you guys were interested here. Hopefully it gauges you an idea of what kind of films I like and that kind of stuff. You can leave a comment, you know, any questions, comments below in the comments section. Tell me what your favorite movies are. I'm interested to see. I'm always interested to have film discussions with people because it's something it's a muscle I don't get to exercise as much. I talk a lot more about video games and stuff on this channel, but I'm trying to branch out more into film as well. So, yeah, but anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, until next time.